Blood smells exactly like dirty pennies. Maeve knew this because she had spent her 20s scrubbing it off emergency room floors, and now it was soaking into the cheap linoleum of her diner at 3 a.m. A man in a ruined three-piece suit was dying in booth 4, bleeding out over the laminated dessert menu. His bodyguards were screaming. The paramedics weren't coming. She didn't want to save a mobster, but she really hated scrubbing stains out of vinyl. The bell above the glass door of Hank's diner didn't just ring, it shrieked. Maeve was halfway through wiping down the counter, the sour stench of stale coffee and industrial bleach clinging to her cuticles. Her lower back throbbed with a dull, familiar heat. The neon sign outside buzzed a relentless, stuttering pink, casting ugly shadows across the wet asphalt of the empty parking lot. It was 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. The only sound in the diner was the dying rattle of the refrigerator compressor and the relentless, driving rain slapping against the single-pane windows. Then came the crash. The front door slammed open, rebounding hard enough against the wall to crack the drywall. Wind howled into the room, scattering a stack of paper napkins like dead leaves. Maeve froze, the wet rag stalling on the Formica counter. 3 men stumbled out of the storm. 2 of them were upright, their faces pale and slick with rain. The third was dead weight, his arms draped over their shoulders, his feet dragging uselessly across the linoleum, leaving a thick, dark smear behind him. "Lock the door!" The taller of the 2 upright men barked. His voice was raw, frayed at the edges, with a panic that didn't belong in a man holding a matte black pistol. Maeve didn't move. Her heart gave one massive, painful thump against her ribs, then settled into a rapid, icy rhythm. Her eyes flicked instantly to the swinging doors of the kitchen. In the back office, curled on a camping cot beneath a scratchy wool blanket, was her 5-year-old son, Toby. "I said lock the fucking door!" The man aimed the gun at her. His hand was shaking violently. Maeve dropped the rag. She walked around the counter, her worn sneakers squeaking on the damp floor. She didn't look at the gun. She looked at the man's eyes, wide, white-rimmed, terrified. Terrified men with guns pulled triggers. She turned the deadbolt with a sharp click and pulled down the heavy metal blinds. "Put him in a booth," she said. Her voice was flat, empty. It surprised even her. They hauled the 3rd man into booth 4. He collapsed onto the vinyl bench, his head lolling back against the glass. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit, the kind of wool that cost more than Maeve's car, but the left side of it was heavy, saturated, and shining black in the harsh fluorescent light. "Call a doctor," the younger enforcer pleaded, pressing his hands against the man's chest. "Call someone. He's bleeding out." Maeve stood 6 feet away, arms crossed, her fingernails biting into the fabric of her cheap pink uniform. She evaluated the dying man. He had a strong jaw covered in dark stubble, his skin currently the color of old ash. His chest hitched in a shallow, wet gasp. Blood was welling up from beneath his collar, spilling over the fabric of his shirt, dripping steadily onto the laminated menu on the table. Drip, drip. A heavy, thick sound. "You don't call an ambulance for that kind of mess," Maeve said softly. "You think I don't know that?" The older one snapped, wiping rain and sweat from his forehead, smearing blood across his own cheek. "Our guy is 20 minutes out. He's not going to make it 20 minutes. Do you have a first aid kit?" "For grease burns, not bullet holes." Maeve's eyes stayed on the dark pool expanding on the floor. The younger man sobbed, a pathetic, ugly sound. He was pressing a handful of flimsy, single-ply diner napkins against the dying man's collarbone. The paper instantly dissolved into red mush. "Dominic! Hey, Dom! Stay with me, boss!" Dominic. Maeve felt a cold spike of recognition. Dominic Varga. She didn't read the papers, but you didn't live in this city without knowing the name. He owned the shipping yards, the local judges, and apparently the absolute devotion of the two idiots currently letting him bleed to death in her diner. "You're pressing the wrong spot," Maeve heard herself say. She immediately bit her tongue. "Shut up, Maeve. Let him die. Let them leave." The man with the gun turned to her, his expression feral. "What did you say?" "He's pressing the wrong spot," she repeated, her voice void of emotion, even as her stomach churned. "The blood is bright red. It's pulsing. That's an arterial bleed. Probably the subclavian. Your buddy is pressing on the muscle, not the artery. He's just making a sponge out of napkins." The older man stared at her, the gun lowering an inch. "You a doctor?" "I was a trauma nurse," she lied. She was an ER tech who had been fired 2 years ago for swiping antibiotics for Toby from the dispensary. But they didn't need to know her resume. And if you don't move out of the way, your boss is going to be a corpse in about 4 minutes. The man hesitated. He looked at Dominic, whose eyes had rolled back, showing thin crescents of white. His breathing was a horrific, rattling hiss. "Do it," the older man ordered. He stepped back, raising the gun again. "But if he stops breathing, I put a bullet in your face. Understood?" Maeve didn't look at the gun. She looked at the blood ruining her clean floor. She thought of Toby in the back room, sleeping through the storm. "Get me a clean apron and a roll of duct tape from behind the counter," she commanded, stepping forward. "And don't point that thing at me while I work. It pisses me off." The smell hit her first. Copper, rust, expensive sandalwood cologne, and the sharp, acidic tang of fear sweat. Maeve slid into the booth next to Dominic Varga. Up close, he was massive. His shoulders took up half the bench, and his body radiated a strange, damp heat. He was unconscious, his head tipped back, his lips tinted a pale, sickly blue. "Move!" She shoved the younger enforcer's hands away. She gripped the lapels of Dominic's ruined suit jacket and yanked outward. The fabric resisted, heavy with blood, but she managed to peel it back. His dress shirt was plastered to his skin. Maeve didn't hesitate. She grabbed the collar and ripped it down. Buttons pinged against the window pane like tiny hailstones. The wound was ugly. The bullet had entered just below the clavicle, tearing through muscle and nicking the subclavian artery. It wasn't a neat puncture. The flesh was jagged, bubbling with bright, frothy red blood with every weak beat of his heart. "Jesus!" The younger man gagged, turning away. Maeve felt the familiar, cold dissociation slide over her. The panic evaporated, replaced by a hyper-focused, mechanical calm. It was a survival mechanism she had honed over years of 12-hour ER shifts, dealing with gangbangers, car crash victims, and overdoses. The man on the table ceased to be a terrifying mafia boss. He was simply a plumbing problem, a leak that needed plugging. "Tape," she snapped, holding her hand out blindly. The older man slapped a roll of silver duct tape into her palm. She tossed it onto the table. "I need the apron. Wad it up." She grabbed a bottle of cheap vodka they kept under the counter for the line cook's special coffees and unscrewed the cap with her teeth. She poured it directly over her hands, ignoring the stinging in her cracked cuticles, then splashed the rest directly into the wound. Dominic's entire body convulsed. A deep, guttural sound tore from his throat, more animal than human. His back arched off the vinyl seat. "Hold him down!" Maeve shouted. The two enforcers scrambled, pinning his shoulders and legs, but the man's strength was terrifying even at death's door. He thrashed, his good arm coming up to bat her away. Maeve threw her left knee over his waist, pinning his hip to the bench, and leaned her entire body weight forward. She didn't have gauze. She didn't have a hemostat. She had her fingers. She thrust her right hand directly into the torn flesh of his shoulder. The sensation was horrifying. It was hot, slick, and tight. She felt the rough edge of shattered bone, the slick pulse of muscle, and finally, the frantic, erratic thumping of the severed vessel. She pinched it. Hard. Pinching the artery against the clavicle with her thumb and forefinger, she dug in until her knuckles turned white. Dominic gasped, a wet, suffocating sound. His eyes snapped open. They weren't the clouded, panicked eyes of a dying man. They were sharp, dark brown, almost black, and glittering with a raw, agonizing clarity. He stared straight up at Maeve. She was straddling his hip, her uniform soaked in his blood, her hand buried inside his chest. For a second, the rest of the diner faded. There was only the harsh buzz of the neon sign outside and the ragged sound of their shared breathing. He didn't look at her with gratitude. He looked at her like a wolf caught in a steel trap, assessing the hunter who had just stumbled upon him. His jaw clenched tight enough to crack molars. He reached up, his large, blood-slicked hand wrapping around her left wrist. His grip was crushing. It felt like an iron band snapping shut. "Don't," Maeve whispered, her face inches from his. Her voice was trembling now, betraying the calm of her hands. "Don't fight me. You'll bleed out in seconds. Let go." Dominic's chest heaved. He stared at her mouth, then up to her eyes. He was searching for something. Panic, malice, a reason to snap her neck. Whatever he found in her, exhausted, heavily bagged eyes, seemed to placate him. Slowly, agonizingly, the grip on her wrist loosened. His hand dropped to the vinyl seat, his fingers curling into loose fists. His eyes slipped shut again. But he was breathing. The bleeding stopped. The younger enforcer whispered, peering over Maeve's shoulder like a frightened child. "I have the artery pinched," Maeve said, her voice tight with exertion. Her forearm was already cramping. The muscles in her hand screamed in protest. "But I can't hold it forever. I need to pack it. Give me the apron." The older man handed her a bundle of thick white cotton. "I'm going to pull my fingers out," Maeve told them, not caring if Dominic could hear her or not. "When I do, it's going to geyser. I need to shove this fabric deep into the wound cavity to create pressure against the back wall of the artery. Then we tape it down. Hard." "Will it hold?" the man with the gun asked. "Until your doctor gets here." "Maybe." "If he doesn't move," Maeve took a deep breath. She counted to 3 in her head. She ripped her hand out of the wound. Blood immediately surged, spilling warm and sticky over her wrists. She didn't hesitate. She jammed the wadded apron directly into the hole, pushing it down with the heel of her hand until she felt it hit the bone. Dominic groaned, a low, vibrating sound of pure agony. But he didn't wake up again. "Tape it," Maeve commanded, leaning her entire upper body onto her hands, using her body weight to keep the pressure localized. "Wrap it around his shoulder, under his armpit, back over his chest. Pull it as tight as you physically can. Do it now!" The enforcers moved with frantic obedience. The sound of duct tape ripping off the roll was deafening in the quiet diner. They wound it around his torso, binding the thick cotton apron down until it looked like a crude, silver bulletproof vest. When they were done, Maeve slowly let up her weight. She pulled her hands back. The white apron was already blooming pink, but the violent, pulsing flow had stopped. It was contained. Maeve slid off the booth, her legs trembling so badly she nearly collapsed onto the linoleum. She caught herself on the edge of the table. Her hands were dyed crimson, the blood already drying tight and sticky on her skin. She looked down at her uniform. It was ruined. Her sneakers were ruined. The floor was a disaster. She felt a sudden, hysterical urge to cry, not out of fear, but sheer, unadulterated exhaustion. She had 4 hours left on her shift, and now she had to mop up Mafia blood. 20 minutes later, the storm had broken into a steady, miserable drizzle, and the cavalry arrived. The headlights of two massive black SUVs sliced through the gaps in the diner's blinds, casting long, sweeping shadows across the ceiling. Maeve sat at the counter, a lukewarm cup of tap water in her hands. She had washed her hands and arms up to the elbows in the kitchen sink, using dish soap and a scouring pad until her skin was raw and red. But she still smelled it. You never really get the smell of an arterial bleed out of your nose. The front door opened. This time there was no panic. 4 men entered in silence. They moved with a terrifying synchronized efficiency. 2 of them carried a collapsible medical stretcher. A third man, carrying a steel medical case, went straight to booth 4 and immediately began assessing the duct tape patch job. The 4th man walked toward the counter. He was older than the rest, maybe late 50s, with salt and pepper hair cut close to his scalp and a tailored trench coat that looked completely dry despite the rain. He walked with a slight limp, but his presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. The 2 frantic enforcers who had brought Dominic in practically shrank against the wall when he passed them. He stopped a few feet from Maeve. He looked at the floor, noting the bloody rags, the empty vodka bottle, the shattered glass from the door. Then he looked at her. His eyes were grey, flat, and entirely devoid of warmth. "You did this?" His voice was a low rumble, rough like gravel under tires. Maeve didn't stand up. She took a sip of her water. It tasted like ash. "If you mean saving your boss's life while your 2 guard dogs cried about it." "Yes," the man's eyebrow twitched. It was the only crack in his marble facade. He glanced over at the booth. The man with the medical case looked up and gave a single, curt nod. "He's stable." The older man turned back to Maeve. "My name is Elias. I handle Mr. Varga's complications." "I don't care who you are," Maeve said, setting the plastic cup down. Her adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind a hollow, aching fatigue. "I just want you out of my diner before my boss gets here at 6. I have a floor to bleach." Elias reached into the inner pocket of his trench coat. He pulled out a thick envelope, plain white and heavy. He tossed it onto the counter. It slid across the formica, stopping inches from Maeve's folded hands. "Compensation," Elias said softly, "for the ruined uniforms, the floor, and the absolute certainty that you will forget everything that happened here tonight. The storm blew out your window. A stray dog wandered in. You cut your hand on the glass. That is the story you will tell the police if they ask why there is a bullet hole in your wall." Maeve looked at the envelope. It was thick enough to choke a horse. There was easily $10,000 in there. Maybe more. It was a year's rent. It was a reliable car. It was kindergarten tuition for Toby. It was blood money. She didn't touch it. She looked up at Elias. "Take your boss and leave." Elias stared at her for a long, quiet moment. He was categorizing her, putting her in a box in his mind. Brave or stupid? "You saved his life," Elias said, his tone shifting, becoming something dangerously close to respectful. "Dominic Varga is not a man who forgets a debt. Neither am I. I didn't do it for a favor," Maeve said, her voice turning bitter. She jerked her chin toward the back room. "I did it because your boy put a gun to my head, and I have a kid sleeping in the back office. I did it to survive." Elias's gaze flicked to the kitchen doors, then back to her. Something dark and protective flashed in his grey eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. A mother's instinct. "Very well. The money is yours regardless. Clean the floor. Keep your mouth shut. We will not trouble you again." He turned and walked away. In a matter of seconds, they had Dominic on the stretcher. As they hoisted him up, the movement shifted the heavy wool of his jacket. Dominic's head rolled to the side. For a brief, fleeting second, his dark eyes fluttered open. Across the diner, through the harsh fluorescent glare, his gaze locked onto Maeve. He was heavily sedated now, pumped full of morphine from the doctor's kit, but the look in his eyes was identical to the one he had given her when her hands were inside his chest. Searching, calculating, memorizing her face. Then, Elias stepped in front of him, breaking the line of sight. They carried him out into the rain. The SUVs started up with low, synchronized growls. Tires hissed on the wet pavement, and then they were gone. The diner was silent again, save for the rattle of the fridge and the hum of the neon sign. Maeve sat alone for a long time. She looked at her hands, clean, but still aching. She looked at the blood on the floor, now beginning to congeal into a dark, sticky syrup. Finally, she looked at the white envelope on the counter. The kitchen door creaked open. Maeve flinched, turning sharply. Toby stood in the doorway, clutching his faded blue dinosaur blanket. His dark curls were a messy halo around his sleep-flushed face. He rubbed his eyes with a small fist, blinking against the bright lights. "Mummy?" His high, reedy voice cut through the heavy silence. He pointed a little finger at the messy booth. "Did you drop the ketchup?" Maeve felt her throat close up. She forced a smile, pushing off the stool. Her legs felt like lead, but she crossed the room and picked him up, burying her face in his warm, sleepy neck. He smelled like baby shampoo and warm cotton. A desperate, fierce wave of protectiveness washed over her. "Yeah, baby," she whispered, her voice cracking. Mommy dropped the ketchup. "It's okay. Go back to sleep. I'll clean it up." She carried him back to the office, tucked him in, and kissed his forehead. When she walked back out into the diner, the exhaustion settled into her bones, heavy and permanent. She picked up the envelope. She didn't open it. She shoved it deep into the pocket of her jeans, ignoring the way it felt against her leg. Heavy, foreign, and dangerous. She walked to the janitor's closet, grabbed the heavy yellow mop bucket, and started running the hot water. She poured an excessive amount of bleach into the steaming water. The harsh, chemical burn of it filled the air, suffocating the smell of copper and cologne. She plunged the mop into the bucket, wrung it out, and began to scrub. She told herself Elias was right. She told herself she would clean the floor, keep the money, and never see Dominic Varga again. She told herself she had survived the night, and that was all that mattered. But as she watched the water in the bucket turn a deep, cloudy pink, Maeve knew, with a sinking, cynical certainty in her gut, that men like Dominic Varga didn't just walk away from debts, and women like her rarely got lucky enough to be forgotten. Paranoia has a distinct flavor. It tastes exactly like the metallic seal of the thick, white envelope Maeve had hidden at the very bottom of Toby's toy chest. 3 weeks had passed since the night the storm blew the doors off Hank's diner. 3 weeks of jumping every time a black SUV idled at a red light. 3 weeks of expecting men in trench coats to kick in the door of her cramped, second-story apartment. But nothing happened. The broken window at the diner had been patched with plywood, the blood scrubbed from the linoleum until the protective wax completely wore away, leaving a dull, scuffed patch near booth 4. She hadn't spent a single dollar of the cash. It felt radioactive. If she spent it, she acknowledged the transaction. If she acknowledged the transaction, she was part of their world. So, the money sat beneath a pile of plastic dinosaurs, and Maeve went back to pouring stale coffee for truck drivers. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 2:15 p.m., the post-lunch lull. The diner smelled heavily of old fryer grease and the sharp tang of window cleaner. Maeve was refilling the sugar dispensers, the repetitive motion numbing her exhausted brain. The little bell above the door chimed, a weak, polite jingle, nothing like the violent shriek of 3 weeks ago. She didn't look up immediately. "Take any seat," she called out, tapping a glass dispenser against the counter to settle the sugar. "I'll be right with you." The footsteps that followed didn't belong to a trucker in heavy boots or a local teenager in sneakers. It was the slow, deliberate, and irregular rhythm of hard-soled leather on linoleum. Step, drag, step, drag. Maeve turned around, a fistful of sugar packets in her hand. The packets hit the floor. He was standing 6 feet away. Dominic Varga. He looked worse than he had when he was bleeding out somehow. The sheer volume of blood loss had left a permanent, sallow greyness beneath his skin. He was wearing a dark navy overcoat that hung slightly too loose on his broad frame, leaning heavily on a black cane with a silver, unadorned handle. His left arm was tucked close to his chest, immobilized in a sleek black sling hidden beneath the coat. But his eyes were exactly the same, dark, calculating, and entirely too sharp for the cheap surroundings. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at the dull, scuffed patch of linoleum near booth 4. "You ruined the wax," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, quiet but possessing an acoustic weight that made the hair on Maeve's arm stand up. Maeve stood frozen. Her heart didn't race. It plummeted into her stomach, a cold, heavy stone. "We're closed." "The sign says open until 4, Dominic replied, slowly shifting his gaze from the floor to her face. He took another step forward, moving toward booth 4. He slid into the vinyl seat with a barely concealed grimace. The leather of his coat groaned against the plastic. "Black coffee? No sugar." Maeve looked at the empty diner. The cook was in the back, listening to a baseball game on a static-filled radio. They were alone in the front. She could run to the kitchen, lock the door, call the police. And tell them what? She thought bitterly. That the city's biggest crime boss ordered a coffee? She swallowed the dry lump in her throat, picked up the glass carafe from the burner, and walked over. She didn't offer him a menu. She didn't smile. She poured the steaming black liquid into a thick ceramic mug, her hand completely steady. It was the ER trauma reflex kicking in. Panic later. Function now. "The envelope was sufficient, I assume," Dominic said, watching the steam rise from his cup. He didn't reach for it. "Elias assured me you accepted the terms." "I took the money so you'd leave my diner," Maeve said, her voice flat, devoid of the deference a man like him expected. "I haven't spent it. You want it back? Give me 20 minutes to drive home." Dominic's lips twitched. It wasn't quite a smile. "I don't ask for refunds on my life, Maeve." She flinched at the sound of her name. Of course he knew it. He probably knew her social security number, her credit score, and what brand of cereal Toby ate for breakfast. "Then what do you want?" She set the pot down on the table with a dull thud. "You're alive. You're welcome. I mopped up your mess. We're square." Dominic finally looked at her fully. Up close in the daylight, she could see the sheen of cold sweat across his forehead. He was in agony. He was hiding it well. But you didn't spend 3 years in a trauma ward without learning to read the micro-expressions of pain. The tight jaw, the slightly flared nostrils, the shallow, controlled breathing. "We are far from square," Dominic said softly. "My personal physician is dead. He died 3 days ago in a rather unfortunate car accident." Maeve felt the blood drain from her face. "The bullet that put me in this booth 3 weeks ago was a localized effort," Dominic continued, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "Someone very close to me decided it was time for a change in management. My doctor, it seems, was part of that transition plan. He stitched me up, took his fee, and then conveniently prescribed me a course of antibiotics that were entirely saline. He shifted his weight, his face paling another fraction of a degree. He reached into his coat with his good hand, slowly, deliberately unbuttoning the top of his shirt. Maeve didn't want to look, but her eyes dropped automatically. Beneath the shirt, heavy gauze was taped awkwardly over his collarbone. The edges of the white fabric were stained a sickly, yellowish brown. The smell hit her then, faint but unmistakable. Warm, rotting, sweet. Infection. A bad one. "It's necrotic," Maeve whispered, stepping back. "It's getting there," Dominic agreed, buttoning his shirt back up with remarkable calm. "I have a fever of 103. I haven't slept in 4 days. If I go to a hospital, the people who paid my doctor will know I'm vulnerable, and they will finish the job. If I call another doctor into my home, I have to wonder how much it will cost to buy their loyalty." He leaned back, his dark eyes locking onto hers. They were fever-bright, burning with a dangerous intensity. "I don't trust anyone on my payroll right now," Dominic said. "But I trust a desperate mother who jammed her bare hand into my chest to keep a gun away from her kid. You didn't care about my money. You didn't care about my reputation. You just wanted to survive." Maeve shook her head, backing away until her hips hit the counter. "No, absolutely not. I am not a doctor. I am an ER tech who lost her license. I can't treat necrotic tissue, and I won't get involved in a mob war. Go find a dirty vet. Go find someone else." Dominic slowly reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small metallic object and set it on the table. It was a set of keys. A Honda emblem caught the harsh fluorescent light. Maeve checked her pocket. Empty. He had picked her pocket when she poured the coffee, or one of his invisible ghosts outside had taken them from her coat in the break room. "I need discretion, Maeve," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming an order rather than a request. "And I need someone who doesn't panic when the blood starts flowing. You start tonight, 10,000 a week, cash, until I am fully healed." "And if I say no?" Dominic's expression didn't change, but the air in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You won't. Because if I die, the men who take over my city are not the kind who leave loose ends. The people who saw me that night? They will be liabilities, you included." He pushed the keys across the table. Next to them, he placed a small, matte black card with an address printed in silver foil. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. I'm a terrible patient. He stood up, the effort clearly costing